Hi, my name is Tom Manning,
I'm Jenu Thomas-Richardson.
and we're here to talk about our research project with COVID-19. Let me give you a little background, and then I'll let Jenu tell you about the slide that's up there. So I've been at Valdosta for a long time, like I've 26 or 27 years, and I started moving from some of my chemistry work to drug development work. Part of it was pushed by the fact that we had so many students that wanted to go into healthcare, pre-med, pre-dent, pre-vet, pharmacy school. So it kind of adapted projects that would help them and they were interested in and that would bring in more people. So our longest running project is one with a drug called bryostatin, first drug to show a reversal in Alzheimer's. It also has anti-cancer and antiviral properties, but it comes from an obscure bacteria that lives in the ocean. And right now it costs on the order of $19 million a gram. And so some of the elite research universities, Stanford being probably the premier one right now, have worked on a synthesis for it. That means they're making it in a lab. But those syntheses are extraordinarily complex. They're very impressive, but they don't solve the problem of having a supply of the drug. And so we've worked out a way we call farming the ocean, where we try to grow that specific bacteria in a specific location in the ocean. It's not as easy as it seems because there are trillions of species of bacteria, and it can vary. You can move 3 feet down the beach and have a slightly different chemistry, and the bacteria colony is different. And so there's a lot that went into that, but that got me really going into drugs. And then we have cancer drugs and antibiotics. A little over a year ago, we won a patent for a tuberculosis, taking a drug that no longer worked against drug-resistant TB and making it work again. And that was all vetted. All the experiments that were done on it were done by the National Institutes of Health, their infectious disease section, right? They had it for 4 years. And that's the one that Dr. Fauci, that everybody knows, came out of. And we also have had 20 cancer drugs enter preclinical trials. Jenu's working on one of them now at the National Cancer Institute, and they provide us with data for that. But when COVID came, literally within a matter of days, we were working on inhalation therapy for TB, because TB is not an American disease. But it's a big problem worldwide. 2 billion people have some form of TB worldwide, and at any given time, about 10 million of them have a very active, aggressive form that can kill you. And somewhere around 1.5 million people a year die from tuberculosis. And most of it is an infection in your lungs, and it slowly dissolves your lungs. So someone that's dying of tuberculosis is basically coughing out little pieces of their lungs and blood, as they die over weeks or months. It's a terrible disease, but we don't even think of it in America, right? It's a gone thing. But it is making a comeback because of drug resistance. And so that's what we've done. We've kind of concentrated on things that we think are visible and important and can help humanity. And since we're at a smaller school, we don't have a lot of big technology. And so typically you would think, that's a terrible disadvantage. But we've tried to make that our advantage, in that what we do is we try to come up with kind of simple, clever ideas that solve the problem, right? As opposed to having these technologically impressive ideas that are extraordinarily difficult and very expensive. So it's kind of a different mindset, really, how we do it. Now, that said, we do collaborate quite a bit, and that's essential for us, right? So if we couldn't test our TB drug, we have nothing, right? And so as we'll talk about today, we're collaborating with a medical school, and if we didn't have the medical school, we'd have very little to nothing, right? So we have our ideas, we can make them in a lab, but so I'll let you tell Jenu the story about the slide that's right in front of you, because in terms of drugs, that was kind of her first thing with me. She did work before that in the ocean with me, but I'll let her tell the story about the congressman and her inhalation and whatnot.
Sure. So I've been working and doing research with Dr. Manning for actually going on 3 years now, and it's resulted in a whole bunch of different stuff. And one of the cooler parts of it is that we get to work with and connect with different political figures, or like science people, and like people that are very well known. But there's a congressman that's the only person that has like a pharmaceutical background in Congress is Buddy Carter, and we got to meet him when I was working on the tuberculosis treatment and drug delivery system and stuff. And at that point, we were working on like biodegradable implants, and then we were switching it over to a more inhalation type method, which we adapted to our COVID treatment that we're using currently. But yeah, so this slide is basically a depiction of when we got to meet him, which was really great. We were presenting our research to him and the different formats of it, from what Dr. Manning was discussing with bryostatin and cancer to tuberculosis. It was just like everything that our team was working on at that point in time.
Yeah, so just to add it, your buddy Carter, we bumped into one of his assistants. We were up at a meeting in Washington, D.C., and we told him about our work with tuberculosis and the drug development and the fact that we had a company in India that was very interested in it. And Jenu worked a lot on that. So a lot of the stuff we do isn't just, lab work. We spent a fair amount of time nurturing a collaboration with a company in India, and that goes to the politics, right? Because as an American guy, if I went to India and tried to stir up something, in terms of a business collaboration, chances of me being successful would be minimum, right? It's kind of I don't want to say closed society, but it's that, there has to be a sense of trust.
Yeah, it's just easier when you know people. So like me having family in India and being Indian, it was kind of helpful. Because when we speak to them, when we speak to other people all over the world, we've spoken to German companies, to the government agency of Brazil, we've spoken to the Indian government, and Indian pharmaceutical corporations, and just like overall people in Iran, everything. There's a cultural difference, and there's certain formalities that are recognized abroad that's not fully recognized here, and it's just a learning curve when you're not used to that. And that's kind of a lot of people. It's like you have to act as a liaison basically when you are talking to these other countries and stuff, and you understand and everything. So it's I don't know how to say that, but yeah, that's basically it.
So we ended up talking to some of Buddy Carter's staff that they were very interested in it, and the fact that we won a patent. Only about 10 to 12 medicinal patents get approved by the patent office, and it takes several years to do. And most of them are coming from elite universities and big pharma, right? So it's not, some guy working in his basement on a new hat that, lets you drink beer at a football game. I mean, a lot of these things people pump millions, tens of millions of dollars into, then they go to the patent office and they get rejected, and game over. So there's not a lot of oh, we're really, really nice, can we do this again? And they say, well, okay. It doesn't happen. It's like boom, you're out. You're out of the game. And so that's something that when we interact with people outside of science, there's a sense of politics that students learn in experiences like this. So let me go to the next slide. What's this one? Oh, so let me tell you a little bit about COVID-19. I'm not going to get real technical, but when you develop a drug, what you want to do, whether it's after a bacteria, a cancer cell, after a virus, you basically want to find a weak link and attack that on a molecular level, okay? And so, for example, if you have COVID, this on here on the left side is what the virus looks like. And so a lot of the drugs that they have now, they try to go inside and hit the RNA, but there's no real treatment right now for COVID, right? There's nothing you can take that will make you better in terms of medication, okay? And that's because they all attack the RNA. So our basic idea was to attack the outer proteins. And the reason for that is there's a specific type of protein on the cover of COVID called a spike protein, right? And you can see it over here. And what it does, it comes in and this is down here a lung cell. And so what it will do is come down and hit the lung cell and let itself in, right? And that's when, it starts to wreak havoc. Once that virus gets into your lung cell, it starts reproducing. Then the cell basically splits open and releases hundreds of the viruses, and they just keep doing that, okay? And so what we did was we focused on these spike proteins because they're kind of a key to get into the cell, and we twist that key so it doesn't work anymore, okay? And so what we do is we don't have to go through this outer barrier to get into the RNA, right? So there's a strategy there. When you do this drug design, you don't just say, "Yep, let me go take some dirt and see what happens." You look at things and you say, "How can I do this? And how can I do it simply and easily?" And so one of the things that we've done that's fundamentally different than any of the other treatments is inhalation. Because if you have COVID, this virus is in your lungs, right? And there's lots of it in your lungs, and that's ground zero. And so what we do is inhalation. And the second part is this is in the bottom of your lungs. That's where it is. It's more of it is in the bottom, and that's where it's kind of safe. And so we had to make particles that are what you call nanometer big, incredibly small, so they could get down there and attack the virus. Okay? And so that's kind of the basic thing. You have to have a strategy when you go after this. We won't get too tactical on that. So Jenu, you want to tell us about the blackboard there?
Sure. So over the past year in 2020, obviously BSU had shut down and everything, but we kept coming back, myself and a few other people that were still interested in doing the research and everything, and we pivoted the drug delivery method that we were working on for our pulmonary tuberculosis treatment, and we pivoted to work on COVID. So that way, because there was a lot of similarities, but basically what the board is that we were given an assignment every single day, and the board just filled up and up and up and up and up, and we kept using there would be the smallest amount of space, and our handwriting got smaller. But this is just one version of the board that was a part of our basically journey to what our treatment currently is.
Yeah, so when we were working on this, we were here every day in the building, from late March until August, September. And I say every day. I mean, sometimes we're in there 7 days a week, sometimes 5 days a week, running different types of experiments on delivering our medication and optimizing our medication. And so it was kind of eerie in a way, because I'd be the only one parking in the parking lot across the street, and then I get a text from the students, come open the side door, they're waiting outside. Then once I let them in, to go around and unlock our doors, et cetera, et cetera. And so, but we kept built this. And after this is after a month, we'd erase it every month or so. But after a month, I looked at that and I said, there's a lot of stuff on there that, I go in and write on it. And then I try not to look over their shoulders and be that kind of, I don't know, you say nagging guy type of thing, and let them get stuff done. But it was, there was some things that worked, some things that didn't work. But I'll tell you that with time, that kind of became our little history, is what was up on the board there. So we could go back and look at something from 3 weeks ago or 5 weeks ago and say, hey, we tried this, we did that, that type of thing. So, so I'll let Jenu tell you about our first publication, a little of the story behind it.
So our first publication was kind of a high risk, high reward kind of thing. We went to publish in Drug Discovery Today, which is a very renowned journal, a scientific pharmaceutical journal. And when we submitted to them, we all said oh, well, the chances of us actually getting in is this is it probably won't happen. And then it actually happened, which was insane. And then right after it happened, we got featured on the World Health Organization webpage, which was also quite, it was something that I don't think any of us fully grasped, because we were still in the creation stages of all of it. And so a large part of it was this is so awesome, but it also drove us to do more with it, because we were okay, so if it's getting this amount of acceptance already, and we were at that point getting emails from all over the world of other scientists or doctors and hospitals are I'm gonna try it, but using your parameters or your general outline in your paper, this is how it worked on my patients. And so it was insane. It was people really gravitated towards this and attempted at using it, and all of the people that used it, now we are building off of those extra data points, basically. All the human data that we've gotten from all of this has been awesome and has really propelled our work.
So, and one of the things, and this is where our advantage for being at VSU is, we had well thought out but very simple and economical treatment, right? So if you look at the planet, most of the planet is poor countries, right? There's not too many, US, Japans, and Englands, right? There's a lot of poor countries, and you look at the biggest countries. You look at, say, India, the African countries that are fairly densely populated, that they need something that's inexpensive and cheap. And if U.S. Pharma comes up with a medication that costs $5,000 a week, and that the average salary for someone in that country is $800 a year, guess what? They can't afford it. And guess what? The country can't buy it for them. So a lot of the medications that we take don't work worldwide simply because they're so far out of the reach of not just the people, but their governments. Okay. And so that's one of the things that was good here. And I'll tell you, the first doctor that got in touch with us was a medical doctor in Iran. And he ran it on a dozens of patients there, and he showed a drop in mortality from 14% to 2%, right? So, and that was it. So this is not just getting someone out of the hospital a day earlier. This was, changing their fate. And so we went back to the congressman and his staff, and we asked about, do you think we can use this data with the FDA to supplant at least one of the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 clinical trials? And they came right back and said, Tom, this is Iran, right? And I'm like, yeah, I probably would have preferred it came from France or Japan or South Africa, but this is what we have. And they said, well, he says the government is going to be incredibly cynical, skeptical, from anything that comes out of Iran because of the politics of the situation. So although, this is a doctor working in a hospital that was overrun with COVID patients, and we felt that everything he gave us was honest, that the politics kind of stepped in terms of us doing our drug development with it. So that kind of opened a new avenue to us. I mean, we had been working with India because they have 500 million people with TB, and so we've been working with other countries. But that's a friendly country. So here was one that was the politics was a little bit different that we came across. So I'll let Jenu tell you a little bit about Brazil, why our next paper went into a Brazilian journal.
So currently in Brazil, there's a lot of COVID is horrible. There's a crisis. It's continued. It hasn't been controlled at any kind of level. People are dropping dead, and so we published in the Medical Journal of Brazil. And with this publication, we also went to the Brazilian government and we talked to them about the possibility of running a clinical trial there and everything, but how their government is currently set up, it's a little bit harder. And again, politics kind of comes into play with a lot of this, and it's not that it's prevented us, it's just creating certain barriers that are a little bit harder to get over. And with this, we also spoke to a news agency with television, is like TV Globo or something similar to that, and it was Brazilian. It was broadcasted throughout South America and everything, with us discussing like this paper and our treatment in total. And with this, we were able to get into contact with not just the Brazilian government agency, but a few other government agencies talked to us also about like the possibility of doing clinical trials. And so that kind of also helped us get to the next stage of what we were doing.
Yeah, and there's a little bit of history here, history of medications worldwide. The U.S. came out with some HIV drugs early in the HIV drug game, I guess you would say, competition, whatever the pharmaceutical companies call it. And the price that was offered to Brazil at was extraordinary, to a point that they still had lots of people dropping dead. So Brazil basically came in and said, "The heck with your patent," and they started to mass produce the drug and distribute it. Right? And so there's this, because of things like that, and then there was this international, back and forth between the U.S. and Brazil about patent protection versus the price of human life, et cetera. So that happened, gosh, I don't know, I'd have to go back and check 20, 25 years ago, something like that. But the point is that when we dealt with them, there's a sense of cynicism about when you put the word United States and pharmaceutical together, that doesn't always equal a good thing. There may be good drugs, but if you dangle it in front of somebody and say, "Give me everything you own plus," otherwise you're not getting a drug, then they step back. And I think we ran into that in Brazil. We also if you go right now and type in Brazil, COVID, it's out of control there. They're talking about getting rid of the president there because he's done such a poor job handling it. And so you think of it calming down in the United States, but there's a lot of countries that haven't even started vaccinating people yet. And even when they start, because a lot of countries don't have the infrastructure we have, there's going to be problems, right? They're not going to be able to go to those rural villages or the countries with these massive cities that have incredible slums. That you're just not going to be able to penetrate those things, and get in there and do a vaccination type program, at least not in the short term. It's going to take a while. So COVID may be kind of waning in the U.S., but worldwide, it's just like TB. TB's still there. COVID may be here for a while. Okay. So I'll let Jenu tell you, because she's been interviewed a few times by TV, and it's obviously a current topic. And I'll say this as a faculty member, that when you work on something, a project, and people understand why it's important, and they can see how they might be able to chip in and help, that the morale level and the participation level goes way up. When I first came to VSU, I was studying dying and decaying matter in rivers, right? How the process it went through. Not a whole bunch of people interested in that. So I get like one student a year, but that translated easily into drug development, and suddenly the number of students I had, blossomed. But I'll let you, Jenu, tell you a little bit about some of the things, like the Brazilian TV and whatnot. So.
So over the past 2 years, since I've started working on the tuberculosis medications and stuff, we've done different interviews and stuff with newspapers, television stations, and everything, mostly local. And currently, this one is from a month ago, I think, just about. And they just wanted an update, because they keep up with the story of where we started, which was with the tuberculosis, and where we've come, which is now with working on a COVID treatment. And with that in mind, it's something that there's a legacy behind it. And so things I worked on in the past, they're following up, because it's changed and it's morphed, and they're like, oh, where are you at now type things. When we finish and go through FDA, we get a FDA approval, or at least get to the next step. There's been talk of us going more nationwide with what we are doing. But there's a lot of interest, mostly because this is a very hot topic. Talking about COVID and treating COVID is something that everybody wants, and so it's what people want to hear about. They want to hear about the positivity, the optimism, and the hopeful cure/remedy for this pandemic that we're living through, and what we've had to change our lives for.
Yeah, and I'll point out that I'm an old guy, so it doesn't matter. I mean, the TV thing. But I tell the students, I say, if you get a little bit of publicity, don't be shy about it. I say, don't go out and seek it, but if it's there, it can be a good thing, because for the rest of your life, Google's going to be there, and you apply for a job. Jenu's going to medical school. I said, people are going to Google you, and if good things pop up, that's what you want, right? And so this may be a small thing, and it's not a make or break thing, but 2 years from now, she's applying for a residency at a medical, for residencies or something like that, and somebody on the committee gets on and Googles her and says, oh, look what she did here and here and here. Oh boy, that makes her a little more impressive. So that good publicity can be a good thing. It's not it's not something that you want to seek out and be a showman about it. Said, but having your name out there, can come back to help you at certain times in your as you climb your career.
Yeah.
All right. So let me can I give a little background on this?
I'm not doing that.
It's not the whole. I'm just giving background. I think.
Okay.
Hold on a second. Yeah. Okay. So let me just tell you a little bit about this. So when you do applied research, one of the things you have to think about is, do I want to commercialize it? How do I want to commercialize it? Where do I want to commercialize it? Who do I want to work with? And so there's these things called pitch contests, right? It's kind of like Shark Tank, but they do them a lot. You'll see it's not like one school in America does it. It's a growing thing. There are several schools in Georgia now that do them on a small scale, larger scale. We now have one this Saturday. VSU has a pitch contest that anyone could have entered, right? And what when you come out of them, it depends upon the pitch contest, but when you come out of them, if you do a good job, you might have some money, and you might have someone called a venture capitalist that wants to invest in you, or an angel. And what a venture capitalist is is someone, say, has a software company, let's say it's the person that developed WhatsApp, something like that, and they sell it to Google or whoever they sold it to, and they get paid $500 million, right? They're not going to just retire and go watch TV all day, right? They want to do something. And so what they do is they go out and they try to find small companies to invest in, right? And this is a big part of the American economic landscape, because more innovation comes from small companies than large corporations typically. And so they'll go out and they have these contests, and so Jenu's been at these. I've had other students in them, and they pitch their idea. And so the idea is that they will draft a business plan, say it might be 15, 20 pages, and then they will give, say, a 10-minute presentation. And it's not just talking about what you did. You have to evaluate the market. You have to look at cost structures. You have to look at the future. You have to look at who your competitors are. You spend time looking at copyrights and intellectual property. And so, students go through this. We did this with our TB drug, yeah, right? And we did this. We have projects with coral and oyster restoration. We've done it. And I'll give an example with the coral and oyster restoration. We had someone that was representing something called the Smith Marine Foundation. That was the CEO of Google after he stepped aside, and he was worth billions, or whatever the heck he was worth, but a lot more than I have. And he had someone in the audience that day, and after our pitch, and he talked to us a little bit, he ended up offering us about $100,000 in cash to do with as we please, to further our idea. It was a green technology. And so sometimes you get hits like that. Lots of times when you get a little bit of this money, there's a string attached. So I'll let you tell Jenu a little about her experience with working on a business plan, because right now she's working. One of her coaches that was assigned to her by the people up in Atlanta is a venture capitalist, and the other one is a man that has bought and sold software companies. Yes.
So when you get into pitch competitions, it's a different ballgame, depending on what your major is. So I'm a biology major, and my minors are in chemistry and art. And it's a different mindset that you have to be in when you switch over, because it's not a research presentation. It's not something that it's something that you have to research more about to learn the jargon and everything, because what they're looking for is different from what my normal audience looks for. So when I'm talking to scientists or doctors and stuff, I can talk in my science jargon till the cows come home. I can do as much as I want, and they understand what I'm saying. And for these pitch competitions, I change it into more of this is what I can make a profit on, and let me tell you how you can make a profit with me on this. So a lot of it changes into trying to sell your idea and turning it into a company, turning it into a legitimate business. So for my pitch competitions, the one that I did in the past and the one I'm doing now, they've both been about creating drug development and everything. For this one, I made a company. It's called AirMed Nano Inhalations, and we are a drug delivery enterprise. And with this, I have worked on making business plans, business pitches, and financial statements, which are horrendous. But it's wonderful to know, because later on when I go through life, I could actually make a legitimate business out of this. What we're working on right now is it has the potential of being commercialized, and that's what we're discussing currently. And if you had asked me last year, before COVID hit, oh, where do you see yourself next year? I wouldn't have said doing this. This would not have been what I said I was going to be doing. But it's definitely been a blessing in disguise, because now everything that I've worked on and what we've worked on is coming to basically fruition at this point. And learning how to commercialize it allows me to have a better insight, so later on in life, I can apply it to different things that I'll do.
So, and to give you a little more background on this, just because I think it's exciting, it's not something that people now do separate from schools. So for example, Georgia Tech absolutely pushes their students to look for commercial applications of their research, right? And pushes them to be. We've gone head to head with a number of Georgia Tech groups, as well as groups from UGA, Georgia State, and Emory. In fact, I think Jenu's in the finals of a competition next week. She advanced from the preliminary round to the first round to the finals.
Yeah.
And the other groups are from Emory, Georgia Tech, Georgia State, and UGA.
And medical schools too.
Yeah,
there's UC Davis, and there's also
Morehouse.
Morehouse.
And so, but they're all graduate students, I think.
Yeah, they are.
And they're usually business majors, so they're very good at the business, but the ideas are, so we're a little cynical of them. But anyway, but who knows? They made money on pet rocks, so who am I to argue? But the point is that you kind of get a feel for how the real world works, right? And it's something that's becoming a growing part of academia is, okay, we can't just have people sit in a big auditorium and read PowerPoint slides. Companies are complaining, employees are complaining that these students aren't really ready for much. But this is kind of, it blends everything. It kind of brings you down to earth. You realize if a company doesn't make money, they go out of business. If a company has lousy employees, they might move to China. There's a lot of the reality of operating a business comes into play that you don't ever really see in a classroom. And so Jenu is getting this firsthand. I'll point out something else is that we're collaborating with Medical College of Georgia, right? So they're the big med school in the state in terms of the state schools. And they volunteered to host clinical trials for us, right? Which was a tremendous commitment, right? That's not just like, hey, roll in here one day and we'll be done in an hour. That's a commitment. And so now that we've been dealing with the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, we've been through 2 rounds with them so far. The first time we submitted, we got knocked back. Then we altered it, and then we've been through 2 successful rounds. And we're in the final stages now.
Yeah,
and
they need like a few more details, and then we get to apply for an investigational new drug.
Yeah. And so, and they don't let you apply until they're going to say yes. And so we're in a really good. I can tell you for Jenu, this is something she never covered in a classroom.
No.
But it's an absolute bedrock activity in the medical industry.
Yeah.
Right. And so, and it's also, it gets you interested and excited when, people in a position of power, I would say, are interested in what you're doing. Right. And I think for students, and I can't speak for Jenu, right, but I think a lot of my students that work on stuff like this, they go home and they talk to mom and dad and grandma and grandpa, and they tell them what they're working on, and they get a lot of positive feedback, right? And so that feedback from home, like if I send them out in the front lawn to count grass, how many pieces of grass are out there? Go. You say, well, why are you doing that? Well, nobody's ever done that before, that kind of thing. Mom and dad wouldn't be that impressed, right? But if they go home and say, hey, we're doing this, we have a business plan, we're dealing with this med school, I think they get a lot more support academically, and they come back to me the next day, fully charged and ready to go. So from a faculty point of view, it helps a lot with the whole morale thing, rather than convincing people this is a good thing to work on, you kind of have to, like we had over the pandemic, they were calling me saying, hey, what time are we getting there today? And I'm like, oh, geez, I'm still in bed. And then so I'd go in and we get to work.
I did not tell I actually didn't tell my parents anything until we published, because then my mom was like looking for something online and my name had popped up for the publication.
Yeah.
And she was just like, why didn't you tell me about this? I was like, oh, I didn't know if it was going to happen, so I wasn't going to jinx myself. Yeah, they knew nothing. And then things started happening, so I had to tell them.
So all right, so I think that maybe we've talked enough. If anyone has any questions, we'd be happy to answer them.
Hi, well, I want to thank you both for being a part of our undergraduate research. This is absolutely fantastic. And when I heard that you all were doing this, first of all, I was like, wow, everybody's locking down except you all. You all are going in and you're trying to make a difference, not just for VSU, but in the world. And it was very impressive to me. But I want to ask of each of you, because I think this is sort of the epitome of what we're all shooting for at undergraduate research. What is it like when you're no longer like professor and student, but now you're colleagues working on potentially global remarkable product? Did that change the reality?
Well, so let me point out that I think your management style, which is something I think about, as you get older, you start to think, how do I manage this situation? One of the things, and I've never been a control freak, you know, I'm more likely to kind of wander off by myself into the woods than be a control freak. But that thing where you kind of order people and you demand this and that, if you're in a creative environment, it doesn't work, right? Now, if you're working at McDonald's and they have to flip 400 burgers an hour for you guys to make money, that's what you have to do, right? And so you have a boss that tells you what you need to do. But in our environment, there has to be kind of a creative, there has to be really good communication, there has to be good morale for everything to work. As soon as that kind of goes away, then you become, you know, I'm pulling my hair out, they don't want to be here. You know, so there has to be that kind of everybody likes what they're doing. And so that I think is really important. And you also have to have students with you that don't take advantage of that, right? Because when I'm kind of easygoing and I give people some flexibility, there are some students that say, hey, this is great, I have some flexibility, I can try this and I can try that. Some other people might say, hey, I have some flexibility, I'm heading to Remberton for the weekend, you know? And so this kind of how the student reacts is important also, right? Because, you know, there's that old, you know, you're responsible for your own actions. So I think that management style is really important. And then I also think it's important that everybody kind of has, it's not like defined down to the hair, but people have to know what everybody's responsibility is and why, right? And so sometimes we may talk to, say, hypothetically, a 60-year-old CEO pharmaceutical guy or girl, whoever's in charge, and I'm going to be the alpha person in that, right? Because there's a level of experience I have, level of knowledge. I kind of know what they want to hear and what they don't want to hear. And sometimes a student may not have that same experience. On the other hand, there's times when a student should step in and have more to say. I'll give a couple of examples, right? So we met with South Georgia Medical Center several times. One of the meetings we were at with COVID, there was probably about a dozen physicians there.
Yeah, we had their board of physicians,
Yeah,
their executive board of physicians.
Yeah. And their CEO was there. And so there was times when I would talk about, this is what the university can do and can't do, I think, and I told them I'm not really qualified to say it, but this is, you know, this is kind of how it's going to work. And then Jenu would talk about what they did in the lab, how easy it was to do, how hard. And so we each had our kind of different levels of feed in with them. We had another one in Louisiana. I've mentioned Iran where the doctor tried it, which
Mississippi.
Yeah, so then we ended up having a doctor in Mississippi that tried it. And he had 83 patients, and he actually showed that it didn't just, because the drug Remdesivir is the big drug now, and that gets people out of the hospital a day or two sooner, maybe, but it doesn't cure anybody. And so the doctor in Mississippi ran it and actually showed that it reversed, it knocked back the viral loads. It was a cure type of thing. And so when we dealt with him quite a bit. And I shouldn't say dealt with him like a bad way. We communicated with him. Each of us had our own conversations with him that were different. You know, I might have been more businesslike, and we need this, we need that. And whereas Jenu's might have been more compassionate, talking about the patients, things of that order. And so you kind of fall in line about what your roles are. And that I think is important also. But the big thing is, you know, each of us has a responsibility. Both of us have to get our jobs done. You can't have a control freak in the room, right? So at least my experience. And so, but I'll let Jenu say something.
So it's when I first started working and doing research with Dr. Manning, a lot of my friends like that I had classes with had taken a class with him, 1 or 2 classes with him. And they were like, oh, you guys are going to get along great. You should do research with him. You're both quirky. And I was like, I don't know what that means. So after that, yeah, it's a very weird, I don't know why.
I don't know what that means either.
But they said, you're both quirky, you'll get along. Your personalities kind of match. And basically what I learned afterwards is that Dr. Manning's like style of, I guess he would say management style is more of, he has an idea and we run with this idea. And if during my experience have like I see like this is gonna work or not gonna work, or like I know how to change it to make it better. He's not the type of person that like he's like, oh, we have to do it this way, it has to be done. He's like, oh, if you think there's a better way and there's an easier solution, more efficient solution, go with that, but like explain why it's that way. And so he hears your opinions and he hears your thoughts and ideas and everything. And so it's very much it's always been a very collaborative work environment, which is great, and it definitely nurtures a lot of creativity because it's not that your ideas are going to be shut down when you bring them to him. He listens to them, and he understands that certain things work a certain way, and if you work like I work with the equipment so often that like I know it's like I know how I can manipulate it for our benefits and all this other stuff. So I can tell him like without even stepping into the lab, oh, this will work better if you do it like this type of way. So it's very collaborative, and I like it a lot. But yeah, and it's also I've worked with a whole bunch of different other students throughout this whole time period. It's gone from working in a team of 12 to working in a team of 1 to working in a team of 3, you know, and so the personalities, it's very obvious what works and what doesn't work, and you have to have people that are willing to work with one another and willing to not compromise, but to hear people out. Because if you don't do that, then we're not going to go anywhere. And it's also a lot of different kids, a lot of different students that we've had. Some of them, like Dr. Manning said, like he's very flexible, and some students decide like, oh, like with this flexibility, I'm going to wait till the last minute, which I get it. I'm also a procrastinator, but there's a time and a place to be able to procrastinate, and you have to know what your strengths are. And that's another thing that plays into this is that in those situations where Dr. Manning leads and I like don't lead, it's because his strengths are like he has experiences and other skill sets that I have not acquired. And in certain situations, I have skill sets and experiences that have led me to be able to do different things. When I talk to doctors, I get the whole patient side because I've worked in hospitals and clinics since I was like 14. So I understand that patient side, and I can communicate with them efficiently on how to treat the patient themselves, and I know the human side to it, not just this is a laboratory setting, I put this in a vial, you know, type setting. I know what happens when it goes in the person.
That's wonderful. I have a couple questions over here in the chat. The first is from Haley Patterson. Would you say that politics was the most challenging aspect of your research? Did you ever run into an organization who gave false or misleading information?
I wouldn't say it's the hardest, but
It's frustrating.
It can be frustrating,
Yeah.
but I think you also have to have a thick skin,
Mm-hmm.
and B, you have to say this is not going to work pretty early. You have to know when things are not going to work out, right? So I ran when a congressman says it's not going to work. I'm not going to argue with the guy, right? I'm going to say, okay, this is not going to work.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's the same. Like, you know, I have students that will say, oh, I can't wait to get in the lab. I can't wait. 3 weeks into the semester, you haven't seen them yet, and they have, you know, every excuse in a book. I'm a astronaut. I was in space. You know, who knows what it is. That, you know, you can see the writing on the wall pretty quick, and you kind of react to it. You don't kind of try to, you know, change the direction of the ship, so to speak. You kind of deal with it, and so I'd say that to me is kind of a big deal.
Yeah, the politics. It's not that it's a hard thing. It's just frustrating to deal with because a lot of the time it's a lot of bureaucracy that's going on that we don't have control over that. We're just trying to help people, and with us it's just like we're just trying to help people, and then politicians are like, we get that, but there's like a certain amount of help that you can give to them that we're going to allow, and that's what's frustrating.
Yeah, you have to pick it, and this is where probably my experience comes into play. Mm-hmm. A little bit more. You know, we've been contacted by a number of companies about collaborating with them.
Yeah.
And the last thing I want to do is to sign an agreement with a company that's dangling a carrot in front of your nose, mm-hmm. because I know that's going to come back to haunt you, right? And so you have to be a little bit cynical there. You have to say, what are their intentions? What do they want to get out of it? We know they want to make money. How are they going to try to make their money? That kind of thing. And so and it's the same thing when you deal with other countries, right? So you have to realize they're going to make decisions not just because we have a good drug. You have to try to put yourself in their place, in their political place, to say, are they going to interact with Americans? Iran, for example, for religious reasons, they don't want to use alcohol for anything. I mean, including as a medication, they don't want to use it. That's something we had to learn. Mm-hmm. When we dealt with India, we had one of our parts of our drug was something called stearic acid.
Yeah.
You can get stearic acid from a plant, and you can get stearic acid from a cow.
Yeah.
And so
we had to define that we were using plant-based because otherwise they had like cultural problems with it. Yeah.
Yeah, so we had to say it's from a plant, it comes from here.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's these little things that pop up you have to be very sensitive to and not just say, well, that's silly. You know, you have to say, okay, it comes from this plant, it's made in Indonesia, blah, blah, blah. And you respect what they have to say. So there's a lot of little things that when you go into it, you have to be willing to learn and be flexible and try to see what their point of view is. Sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad. So.
Okay, well, that is good to hear about. Sarah would like to know, how does the nanometer small actually play a factor into the inhalation and attacking COVID-19? Does it just attack the spike proteins or on COVID or the RNA?
Okay, so first off there's a lot of studies that when you inhale particles, the bigger the particle, it only, like a larger particle gets stuck in your throat and your upper lungs. So for example, most inhalers that you take, they get in your in your throat and your upper lungs. That would not work. Less than 1% of that might make it to the lower part of the lungs. And so we had to have a way where we could deliver our medication, so to speak, deep within the lungs. And so you had to make something that was under 100 nanometers. So 100 nanometers is probably about 50 to 100 times smaller than your average particle that you get from an inhaler or whatnot. And that to us was critical because otherwise you're right back at the same problem you have when you have a tablet, right? If you take a tablet for a lung infection, a lot of that tablet goes to your head, it goes to your fingers, it goes to your toes. It's not going to your lungs. So there's a real inefficiency there. It also goes into your GI tract. So the acid there can break that molecule apart. You're going to excrete some of it different ways, can come out in your sweat. So it becomes really inefficient. And we wanted to have a really high hit rate. And yes, for the COVID, we absolutely are aiming at that spike protein, right? So a protein is like a nano machine, but it has to have a certain geometry. If you can change that geometry, it doesn't work anymore, right? And a simple analogy might be like a tire on a bicycle. If that tire is straight, that rim is straight, you're fine. If you come in and you bend that rim a little bit, it's not going to work, right? Your bike's not going to work. And so that's the same thing. You can get in there and you can hit that protein and bend it a little bit. It's the locking key is not going to work anymore. And so that's what we aimed at, was that outer spike protein. We didn't try to do anything for the RNA because the RNA is encapsulated inside that virus. So you have to go through the proteins on the outside, then you have to go through this lipid layer, then you have to get in to hit the RNA. And what do you call it? So a lot of the drugs go after the RNA, but they don't work very well. And that's probably a big part of it, is that they don't go through that. They can't penetrate, in through that kind of chemical cage that's blocking to keep them out.
Okay, thank you. We're about out of time, so I do have one question for each of you. So we'll start with Dr. Manning. Do you have any final thoughts on undergraduate research and what we should do?
Well, I mean, every field's a little bit different, obviously, or even in some cases a lot different. But I would say I would try to find an area that you're passionate about, and I would try to find something that can impact society. So someone might say, well, I'd love to, paint daisies, and that's great, but if you can make money or you can impact society more with electronic medium and doing, daisies that you put in hospital rooms for small children to cheer them up, that's a lot better than you painting daisies and hanging them in your bedroom, right? So I would look at your projects, and you'll find that it's a lot more rewarding, right? You can only reward yourself so much before it gets old. And so you find something that you think's important and that you're passionate about, and then it's a path, right? It's not going to be straight. You're going to have to turn. You're going to make changes. You're going to meet new people. You're going to leave other people behind, right? And you're kind of on your journey then. But I would definitely say look to a combination of passion and impact society.
Oh, am I answering the same question?
No, you get a different one in a minute. But before that, we've got one more question over in the chat box. It says, what triggers the big release of copies of COVID in the lungs, and why does it happen? Well, that sounds like a whole lecture.
Yeah, I'll say this, when you get a virus in your lungs, it can do one of two, or it can do both things. One is COVID can be basically engulfed by one of your lung cells, and that's what we try to block, is that engulfing process. And once it's in that cell, then it reproduces itself, right? And it replicates, because a virus isn't really alive. So it replicates, and it might have 100 or 200 or 300 in that cell, and that cell just bursts open, and now you have another 200 floating around looking to infect the other cells. The other thing that can happen is what they call a cytokine storm or a bradykinin storm, and that's when your body's immune system overreacts. So you want your body's immune system to react. You don't want it to overreact, because when it's overreacting, it attacks everything. And that's the second thing that COVID causes. So that's when someone's in the emergency, when someone's in ICU and they're on a ventilation, they've probably had a cytokine storm or bradykinin storm, and that's when their immune system starts overreacting. It generates all this organic matter in your lungs, and it prevents you from breathing. So the air goes into your lungs, but it can't make it to your blood. There's kind of like a organic layer that's blocking it. So, but that's that you can spend a lot of time trying to explain that.
Yeah, there's 2 classes you can take: molecular genetics and virology. So that's their whole classes.
Well, that helped me a lot too, and I probably won't take that class. It's
a good class.
I bet it is, and I bet I wouldn't
I learned
understand
a
it. Well, Jenu, we're going to give you the last question. Since this is undergraduate research, and I do appreciate everything you've done for the world, really, that you've tried to do with this, but I want to ask you this last question. What would you tell a student who's interested in an undergraduate research project?
First of all, it depends on their project, but I would tell that student, if they're interested in pursuing it, then go for it. Find a mentor or professor that is aligned with that project passion, and figure out how you can collaborate in order to make it come to fruition. It's a lot of, you have to network, and you have to create relationships and build on them, and those foundations that you're making are going to help you later on. And anything that you have currently that you're really passionate about and you have this interest in, and you know that it's going to help a lot of people, or heck, if it just helps a group of kids or something like that, you have to talk to other people that are like-minded in that way, and they'll help you, and they'll have an outsider's perspective that will be able to add value to what you're doing, because you won't see it. Certain things, I'll look at it from a certain perspective because that's my perspective. But when I work in a team, and I'm working with Dr. Manning, and I'm working with all these other students, I'm able to understand, look at it from a different perspective, and I'm looking at it from different facets and making this larger picture. And that's what you have to do. You have to go and make these networks, so that way when you do your presentation and it's something you're extremely passionate about, you can go with the utmost confidence, and you can pursue it, and you can tell all these other people that it's not just me, this is my team, these are the connections that I've made, and this is why it's so great, and this is why I am so passionate about it. But it's very much develop relationships and develop key team members and stuff in your life in order to get your project from point A to point B or Z, wherever you want to take it.
Well, I thank you both for being here and for all your work. You certainly set the bar high, and Jenu, I do expect to eventually see you running the CDC. And I'll get to say, I talked to you when, right? But thank you both for your time, your research, and for your caring to take this to the world. I hope you have a great day, and it's been fun talking with you.
Well, thank you for having us.
Anytime. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.